So here he goes. Look. So now he's starting. So it makes no sense to say that something exists before an experience. How can one know something is there before it's seen, felt, and heard? And this is really important, okay? This is not just a trivial throwaway point. He's saying, like, in what possible way can you say that something exists unless it's known? And in the next verse, in the commentary in the next verse, I go into that a little bit in the commentary, that in logic, in Buddhist logic, an existing thing and a knowable thing are synonyms. Which means what? If it ain't known, what? Doesn't exist. And when it's known, what? It comes into existence. Okay? Which is very, very important. Very important point to try to grasp. Because do we believe that things exist that we don't know? See? And in this verse he's saying, how do you possibly know that? How can you possibly know that things exist that you don't know? You see what I mean? It's like, isn't there a conundrum there? Here, listen to what I just said, okay? How can you know that something exists that you don't know? You're supposed to look like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. Are you looking that way? You're mostly looking at me like, well, yeah, I know plenty of things that I don't know. It's impossible to know something that you don't know, right? Come on. It's a contradiction in terms to say, I know something that I don't know. Isn't it? Yes or no?
Yes.
How can we say there's a seer, a hearer, a feeler who exists before they see, hear, or feel? Isn't that what makes them a seer, a hearer, and a feeler? Is by seeing, hearing, and feeling? The one who sees cannot exist before the act of seeing that makes it possible for us to call them one who sees. So how could they exist before seeing? How could they exist before the thing that makes them a seer? Right? How could we exist before we interact with the world? I mean, ultimately, that's where he's going. See? How could there be a subject that existed before the objects of the world that the subject interacts with? So which came first, the subject or the object? That's where we're going. There's a little preview, a little glimpse. See, it's a massive argument. He's like opening up a huge can of worms in this chapter. So from another angle, we could also say that if there were a self-existent, independent, previously existing seer, and watch the language here. We just got to go through it really quickly. Self-existent means exists by itself. Doesn't need anything else. It exists by itself. Independent means does not depend on anything else. Right? Self-existent, independent, previously existing seer, hearer, smeller, taster, or feeler. They would always be seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. This is reminiscent of what we talked about last Monday, right? If they were essentially a seer, they would always be seeing. Right? And then they wouldn't need to see. They could exist before seeing, as a seer, always seeing. Did you hear that? Should I say that again? Because that doesn't make any sense either, does it? If they were essentially a seer, that means they see. Yes? That's what it means. I'm a seer, I see. I could exist without seeing. I could exist before seeing. Why? Because I'm a seer. I don't need to see. I'm a seer. I'm seeing. I'm seeing all the time. I'm a seer. That's what makes a seer is seeing. So it needs to see.
Like the surfer did.
Yeah, it's exactly the same argument. Okay. Good. Back to all right, a surfer. A surfer who is really essentially a surfer would never have to surf, because they're always surfing. Right. Also. They would never have to surf because they're a surfer always surfing. There's a surfer. I'm a surfer. And it's the same argument here. So therefore, they would not need to see or something. So it couldn't be known by the seeing, hearing, and so forth, right? I mean, I kind of add this later, right? So this last paragraph also is making the same point. If you say there was a self-existent, independent seer who sees before the seeing, then they wouldn't be able to be known by seeing. They wouldn't be able to be known by the fact of their seeing, because they wouldn't need to see, because they're seeing. They're a seer. They're already seer. So how can you see a seer? Unless they, right?
Yeah.
Right? You could, if they were a seer who existed self-existently as a seer, you could never see them as a seer. Right? Because they wouldn't need to be in the process of seeing to be a seer. Because they, right? All right. Yeah, it's a little subtle. You guys can chew on that for a while. 9.4. Vinapi darshanadini yadi kasau vyavastata amunyapi bhavishyanti vina tena na samshaya. If you claim it sits there before ever being seen or such, no doubt their senses also could exist without its presence. So what this means is like this. If that definitely existing thing that we were talking about, right, that you posited, something that definitely exists before, right, if that definitely existing thing could exist without seeing, etc., without seeing, without hearing, and so forth, then without a doubt, they could exist without it too. What's the they? The seeing, the hearing, the present participles. The seeing, the hearing. So if you say there's a seer who exists independently, self-existently, all by itself, without interacting with the seeing that makes him a seer, then the seeing could exist also independently. You could have a seeing without seers. So again, it's rehearsing the surfer surfing thing a little bit, right? Same kind of argument. The people here on Monday have a little advantage here, because they went through pretty much the same kind of argument so far. If there previously existed a visible thing, so you can take it, what is the it here? If you claimed it sits there before ever being seen. So one way to say what it is a visible thing. Is it in relation to seeing, right? If you say it existed as a visible thing, it would be, if there previously existed a visible thing, it would be separable from the sense power of seeing. And then he said, and vice versa. If they were independently existing, then you could have seeing without anybody who sees. And that would make no sense. Absolutely no sense. Okay? Then another way of taking it, the same logic holds if we take the it that sits there before ever being seen or such as the person who sees. Maybe it's the seer who exists before seeing, right? If there were an independently and previously existing seer, then there would also have to be an independently and previously existing ability to see that was just waiting to be deployed by a seer who was already and always seeing. And yet that one you can think about for a while too. Either way it goes, it's not going to work out. Next verse. Ajayate kena chit kaschit kim chit kena chit ajate. You can kind of hear what he's doing here, like in Sanskrit. Kutta kim chit vidna kaschit kim chit kam chit vidna kata kutta. So she's translated it like this. Which one, Lama Krishna is translated? Which one is identified and which one identifies? In which one's absence is it that the other could not be? Whichever one is absent, how could the other be? So here's another way of thinking about this verse, another translation. By what would it be known and who would know it? If there was a seer who existed previously to seeing, by what would it be known? How could you know it? And who would know it? How could you know it without seeing it, for example? Right? Yeah. By what would it be known? Well, the seeing of the seer. By what would it be known? If a seer existed independently of seeing, how could you know that they were a seer? Right? Unless they are seeing. But by what would it be known? And who would who would know it? Who would know that? Who would know a seer that existed before seeing? How could it exist without them? And how could they exist without it? What is them and it here? You say like the seer, how could it, the seer, exist without what? The seeing and so on, the sense powers. How could the seer and etc., the feeler, the hearer, the smeller, exist without them? The seeing, the smelling, and so forth. And how could they, seeing and so forth, exist without the ones who are doing those things. So he's got you coming and going a little bit.